What's going on, YouTube? This is HyperDark19. I'm just starting a channel here on YouTube, or as they call it between us duelists, YugiTube. Clever. But yeah, this is my first video, and I am starting, like I said, a channel on just pretty much my thoughts on the game, and I have a few maybe unique perspectives that I'd really like to put out there and just see what kind of results come back, and overall, just what you guys think. I'd like to really hear responses about this. So yeah, let's well, first of all, before I actually do anything here, I want to just put a disclaimer out there. I do not personally claim at all to be an expert on this game whatsoever. I think I'm a fairly competent duelist, and I think I have some good ideas that deserve to be put out there. I'm not saying that I am of championship caliber or that I'll probably never get an invite to nationals or whatever. But yeah, I'm just going to put my thoughts out there, and I'd really be interested to see what other people think about it. So this is my pilot video, and I'm going to be talking about, as you can tell by the title up there, the extra deck, the Duelist's Best Friend. And I say best friend because most of the decks out there today in the meta rely on using synchro monsters. And I'm going to go over, in this first video, I'm going to go over one, why synchro monsters have just revolutionized the game as we know it. Two, some synchro monsters that I think deserve to be staples in every player's extra deck, as long as you can support them, that is. Three, some underrated picks that I think deserve to see more play than they really do. And finally, after all that, I'm going to share some common ways to combat synchro monsters and synchro-based strategies. So, yeah, now that that little disclaimer and everything's out of the way, let's get going here. First of all, I say synchro monsters have really revolutionized the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! As we know it, because let's consider what we had before synchro monsters. I mean, first off, we had tribute monsters, which were the earliest form of boss monster, and they were the original powerhouses of the game. Had some pretty powerful effects and power overall, as in attack points. But they required tribute monsters to summon them, which really slowed them down for the most part and made them sometimes difficult to play, especially back in the early game when special summoning wasn't really that common. So, yeah, there were those. And then after that, ritual and fusion monsters were introduced to the game in like the GX series, tried to make them popular, elemental heroes and all that jazz. But they never really caught on, mostly because one, they require lots and lots of like like you have to put a lot of effort into them. You had to have like 2 or 3 monsters and a polymerization or a ritual spell card or something, and they never really became popular, except the obvious exception being Gladiator Beasts and now Miracle Geminis. But for the most part, fusion ritual-based strategies never really took off, especially rituals, because rituals belong in your main deck, and they just took up too much space, made this uneconomic to use. But the only ritual deck that I recall seeing in competitive play ever is Demise OTK, and you really don't see that deck very often. So now we have synchro monsters because Konami wisely decided to introduce this new type of monsters called tuner monsters, which basically combines the elements of a tribute monster with a ritual spell card or a polymerization type card into one compact monster form, which really made synchros, one, easy to play, economic to play in that they're in the extra deck. They don't clog up space in your main deck. And, excuse me, a lot of them are easy to play, have relatively easy summoning costs. Plus the fact that a lot of tuners like Gale and Fabled Raven, Junk Synchron, have broken effects anyway besides being tuners. But yeah, so that's pretty much the history of those kind of monsters in the game. So without wasting any more time, let's get down to what I think are some extra deck staples for people out there who can play them. Number one, Stardust Dragon. Bet you didn't see this one coming. This Stardust Dragon is basically the bread and butter of the synchro monster genre, And if you ask any player to name, one synchro monster, Stardust Dragon will probably be the first one that pops to mind. It's the iconic synchro monster of the game. Yusei uses it in 5Ds. You see it all the time. And yeah, it has pretty good stats: 2,500 attack, 2,000 defense, and which is fairly decent for a level 8 monster, as well as an effect that just completely redefined the game as we know it. I mean, before Stardust came along, people were free to drop their Dark Holes, drop their Regeki Breaks, and Judgment Dragons, and what have you, without really worrying about it. The destruction effects were the meta, basically. Dark Arm Dragon, if anyone remembers that whole format of Teledad. Destruction was the name of the game, and whoever had the most destruction had the advantage. But now that Stardust Dragon came out, a lot of people had to rethink their strategies entirely, because people are afraid of the Stardust Dragon. People are afraid of the Starlight Road that could bring it out. So it made a lot of people completely adjust their strategies, and that's why I think Stardust Dragon is definitely my #1 choice for an extra deck slot. Moving right along to my #2 favorite, Black Rose. I mean, for those of you out there, most of you I would assume who know what it does, it's Black Rose. What can you really say about it? It provides pretty much every deck that can play tuners with a potential field nuke, which is just completely unprecedented in the game up until now. So, yeah, it's Black Rose. Moving right along, Ally of Justice Catastor. It's level 5, so it has pretty easy level to attain for most decks. It's dark, which definitely helps playability. It's a machine, which, if you combo with limiter removal, definitely helps playability. And and the thing about it that's really effective is it combats any strategy that's not based on dark monsters because of its effect. Destroys any monster that's not dark that it does battle with. Combats a lot of strategies out there very effectively. So, Catastor definitely deserves a spot. Next, Formula Synchron. I say this is a staple mostly because it's just so good. It's Formula, right? I mean, a lot of decks can't play it. Like, I know I only have this one copy because I don't run a lot of decks that can support Formula Synchron right now, but if you can run it, you should run it. It is extremely, extremely good. Not to mention Shooting Star. I mean, Stardust Dragon plus Formula equals Shooting Star. And if you're going to play Shooting Star, you should definitely play it. I mean, gives you a free draw just for Synchro Summons, so it's great. And it's a Synchro tuner, like I said, Shooting Star. It's the only Synchro tuner in the game right now, at least until the Tech Genus guys come out, so Formula Synchron. Next, Colossal Fighter. I know a lot of people don't take advantage of this card, but a lot of other people do. It is potentially one of the most powerful synchro monsters, maybe even one of the most powerful monsters in the game, in my opinion. Especially if you're playing Warriors. Even if you're not playing Warriors, it's a fantastic card. Whenever it's destroyed by battle, you can basically resurrect any warrior in your graveyard, but why would you want to resurrect any warrior other than Colossal? He's just so good. Not to mention the fact that this guy and the next card that I'm going to show you pretty much make the easiest OTK to achieve in the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! So, Colossal Fighter definitely deserves a spot. Like I said, Armory Arm is the next card, making the whole Colossal Armory OTK possible. For those of you who don't know how it works, you equip Armory Arm to a monster your opponent controls that's stronger than your Colossal Fighter, and you just keep attacking into it and resurrecting Colossal until they hit game, because whenever Armory Arm's equipped monster destroys a monster, your opponent takes damage, which means even if they technically control the monster that's equipped with Armory Arm, they still take the damage, not you. So that makes the whole OTK possible. And it's a machine. It's got 1,800 attack, 4 stars. It's a decent card. Definitely deserves a spot in your extra deck. The only card in here that's not a synchro that definitely deserves a spot, I think, Chimeratech Fortress Dragon. This card is basically the anti-machine card, or if you're playing machines, it can be very beneficial to you. It really stopped the Machina Gadgets, Cyber Dragon, hybrid decks in their tracks, which are pretty powerful decks. I used to run Machina Gadget Cyber. I really, really liked it. I don't anymore, but this is a really, really good card, and if you have an extra spot in your extra deck, you definitely should consider running this card. Now, I'm going to move on to the cards that I think are underrated and deserve to see some more play than they actually do. So let's move right along here. First of all, on the underrated list, in my opinion, Red Dragon Archfiend. Mostly because of its just raw power. It is just with straight up attack points. It's one of the most powerful synchros. And its effect actually is pretty useful if you're playing decks that like to spam tokens, like plants, get the dandelion all over your face, because it can clear the field of defense position monsters, and it's just a really good card in my opinion. It's easy to summon. I honestly don't see why more people don't run it. I think you should really consider running it if you have the space. Next on my list of underrated synchros is Thought Ruler Archfiend. One of the only psychic synchros you can really play outside of the psychic deck and splash into other decks. I, for example, splash this in my Flamvels. This card is very, very good. It's got 2700 attack, which is really good for a level 8 monster. And also, it has, whenever it destroys a monster, you gain life points equal to that monster's attack, which is pretty good because there's not a lot of cards out there that can gain you life points, especially a good one like this. Also, tacked onto that pretty amazing body is an effect that basically you pay 1,000 life points. This guy can't be targeted by spell or trap effects. So D-Prison, Regeki Break, stuff like that doesn't have any effect on it. Which makes it really good. Plus, that effect applies to any other psychic you control, so not just him. He can, if you're playing a psychic deck for whatever reason, he protects all your other psychics. So even if you're not playing a psychic deck, I think this guy definitely deserves some consideration because of that. Next, Mistworm, because it's Mistworm. He's got 2,500 attack, not so great for a synchro that's already level 9, but a lot of decks can really take advantage of this because level 9 really isn't that hard to attain for most decks, especially if they're based on synchros. Plus, his effect is just you bounce 3 cards from the field. It gets around all kinds of destruction effects like destruction triggered effects, I should say, like Stardust Dragon and Starlight Road and the like. So it's definitely a really good card, deserves a spot in the extra deck if you can afford it. Next, I'm going to discuss 6 stars because of the cards that I've left out of my list so far. The one staple card that many people consider a staple that I've left out of this list so far is Brionac, Dragon of the Ice Barrier. I would have given the spot to Goyo Guardian personally because I would prefer Goyo over Brionac most of the time. That's another story entirely. But since Goyo is banned now because of the recent extra deck ban, well, just overall ban list, you can't play Goyo in your extra deck anymore, and so many people are resorting to Brionac. I personally don't have a Brionac. I don't play Brionac. I think it's not that great of a card, really. I mean, it's a good card, but just because a card is good doesn't mean it can be overrated, and I think Brionac is an overrated card to some extent. I would choose Goyo Guardian, but I'm not going to go into that right now, discussing a card that's been banned and therefore has no more relevance on the game as of right now. So it's at some point, if they do choose to unban Goyo Guardian, maybe I'll do a video segment on why I think Goyo is better than Brionac, but meanwhile, moving right along, instead of Goyo or Brionac, I have 2 alternative 6 stars for you to consider. Iron Chain Dragon and Flambeller Quizis. Both of these guys are easy to summon. They have generic requirements, and they can be used by pretty much any deck. They've got decent attacks, 2,500 for this guy, 2,100 for this guy. And they've got effects that can really, depending on what deck you're playing, really throw your opponent's strategy off. Iron Chain Dragon mills the top 3 cards whenever it does damage, and Flambeller Quizis has a defense-piercing damage ability, and it gains 300 attack every time it does damage to your opponent. So, depending on what kind of decks you're playing, these guys could either help you or hurt you, so it's really depending on, I guess, what kind of decks you're versing at the time. And yeah, so really, that's all I have to say about those guys. Another card that I don't have right now, I'm in college, deal with it, I don't have all my cards with me. Ancient Fairy Dragon, I feel, is a really underrated choice for the extra deck because it just so effectively combats the majority of decks out there right now. I mean, what field spell dependent decks are there out there right now? Let's see, Gravekeepers, Malefics, if you play Malefics. What's the other? Dragunities. Its ability is just, it combats so many of the meta decks effectively. Plus it has a pretty good defense, which a lot of decks aren't really expecting the defense. Like Glad Beasts, for example, have a really